Okay, so thank you very much, Evelyn. So today we will walk through some guidelines to start using Web2Cit for those of you who might be interested in starting to test it, to help us test it. So to begin with, we will explain how Web2Cit translation works. Generally, this is gonna continue working. It's not something that is gonna change in the near future, so we wanted to start with this. And then right now, the Web2Cit ecosystem is not yet complete. We are still missing one very important part of it, which is the Web2Cit the visual editor. But because the other two parts of the ecosystem which are relevant, which are the Web2Cit core library and the translation server are ready, we wanted to explain how to manually use this so that you can start helping us test it. So second point today, we will explain how to manually adjust Web2Cit translation without this visual editor, which is not yet ready. And we will also explain in the third part how to use Web2Cit translation after it has been manually adjusted. And anyway, all of what we will be discussing today is available in Meta in this link here. Sorry, I didn't said this before, but we're going to share these slides with you. You can find them probably in the description of this video as well. So everything we will be discussing today, you can read it in much more detail in that link right there. Without the final fragment, early adopters, that's the link. So how does Web2Cit translation work? This gray rectangle represents Web2Cit translation system. And Web2Cit translation system configuration is divided into website domains. So for example, if we have an article which is at www.example.com/article1, the part www.example.com is the domain of that website. So Web2Cit translation configuration is defined on a per domain basis. So we will have a set of configurations for example, example.com, and a separate set of configurations for example, sub.example.com, and so on and so forth. Within each domain, we have a series of one or more translation templates. A translation template is an example translation for one specific website in a given domain. And that template includes translation rules or procedures, we're going to explain this in a minute, that indicate how that specific website template should be translated. That is, how we have what we have to do to extract the relevant metadata from that specific website. So in this example, we have, for example, /blog/article1. That means that we have a translation template defined for example.com/blog/article1. And that means that we have defined some rules to extract metadata for that specific website. These are just translation examples. We're going to show in a minute how those translation examples are used to translate the whole universe of web pages that live inside one specific domain. But going back, so again, we have separate configurations for separate domains, and within each domain we have one or more translation templates, which are in green here. So when we have a new target web page that we would like to translate, we give this target web page to Web2Cit, and Web2Cit does some stuff that we will explain now in a minute, and it returns a citation. And this citation can be used in Wikidata, in Wikipedia, sorry, and can also be used in other softwares, such as, for example, the reference management software, Hera. We're going to see this in the end. So I said before that we had one or more translation templates inside each domain. Let's see how these templates are structured. So within each template, we have a series of fields, a series of template fields. And we have different kinds of fields. So for example, we have an item type field, we have author last field, and many other fields, all of which are described in detail in the guidelines that I showed at the beginning. These fields can be either required or not required. I'm going to go back to this in just a minute. And inside each field, we can have one or more translation procedures. I'm going to explain this now in a minute. Just bear with me for a second. Each field then outputs an output. So we have inside this template, we have a field for item type, which outputs an item type output. Or we have a field for author last, and that field outputs an author last output. So let's go with a specific example. Let's say we have a target web page, like the one I showed in the slide before. This target web page is processed by each of these procedures, and an output comes out of it. So for example, for item type, we might get one value coming out from this procedure, and we can have, for example, multiple values coming out from these two procedures for the author last field. And these values can be either valid or invalid for the field. Like, again, in the guidelines, this information is, you have specific information, but for example, for the item type field, we say that a valid output is a string that is a text that is not empty. So as long as the output is a string and the string is non-empty, then the output is going to be valid. Or for example, if we have the date field, that has a specific format. Like we are expecting something that is day / month / year. If the output is not that format, then the output is going to be invalid for that field. All right. Now, if and only if all outputs for required fields. So remember that we said that fields could be required or not. What does this mean? If a field is required, then its output has to be valid. Because if the output is not valid, then this template is not going to be applicable for the specific target web page. All right. So a template is applicable for a specific target web page. That is, a template can be used to translate a specific web page if and only if all the required fields output a valid output. If this is the case, then this output is converted into a citation. Otherwise, we don't get a citation for the template. Is this clear so far?
Yeah, but does that mean that then you will need to use a different template, right? So
exactly.
Yeah.
We will go back to that in just a second, but that's exactly the case.
So the idea is that there are several templates for different web pages that have different characteristics.
Absolutely. Inside a domain, you might have maybe all the web pages in your domain are identical, so there's no need to define more than one template. But it might be the case that, for example, let's say that you have a newspaper that lives in a domain, but that you have, I don't know, for example, you might have news, you might have, I don't know, event descriptions, you might have like different kinds of articles, and how to extract metadata from them might be different. So in those cases, you would define more than one template for one domain. And regarding template fields, in the guidelines, in the translation fields section, you can find further information about which field types we support, how these field types map to specific fields of the citation, and how we validate each field. So when we said that an output can be valid or invalid for a specific field, that follows some basic validation rules that are available in the guidelines. Just so that I'm not speaking like in the air, let me open the guidelines here. So here are the early adopter guidelines in Meta. And as I mentioned in the slides, we have this translation fields section, which is right here. And here we have the series of translation fields that are supported. So for example, for the specific, for one of them, item type field, right here, it tells us that the field name is item type. It tells us that how it validates. It says a single value matching any of the supported Citoid item types, and shows here a list of item types. Like for example, it can be book, newspaper article. We might go into detail in a separate video, but you can find all the supported item types here. And how is this field mapped? Because item type is a field of Web2Cit. How is this mapped to a citation field? Well, in this case, it's very simple. It's just mapped to the item type field in the Zotero or citation output. But again, like this is, you can find further information for the fields in this guideline. And sorry, just one thing that I'd forgotten. I said, oh, sorry, how do I, let me, here. Some fields can be required, some fields can be non-required, and some fields are mandatory. That means that they are always required. That's not something that you can freely choose whether they are required or not. And those mandatory fields, they are obligatory for a template. But this is very detailed. You can find more in the guidelines. Yes.
But so then it means that sorry, I don't want to criticize your slides, but then where it says field item type, where it says required, that means that it's actually mandatory, not required.
In this case, in this specific case, yes, because it's the item type, and item type is one of the mandatory fields. One can manually tweak this and disable it using like manually adjusting the translation, as we will see in a minute. But that's not going to affect the translation because this is a mandatory field. So it doesn't matter what the user chooses here. The final decision is going to be that it's this one is mandatory. Of course, when we have the visual editor, changing between required or not required is not going to be possible for a mandatory field. But as this is not yet ready and we're still using, we're still manually editing the configuration files, as we will show in a minute, the users might choose whether a field is required or not. But if it is mandatory, then the system is just going to ignore the user's definition. Okay, so we said that each field can have one or more procedures. Let's see what a procedure looks like. So a procedure consists of a series of selection steps and a series of transformation steps. A selection step is the step that says what specific parts of the web page we want to select, where the metadata lives in the web page. And after we have selected all the metadata that we're interested in for a specific field, then we can apply a series of transformation steps to this metadata. Again, we're not going to go into detail here, but in the guidelines, you can find a full list of all selection steps and transformation steps that we currently support. So let's go with an example. We have this target web page, and a target web page not only has the web page HTML. Of course, we have a web page, we have the web page HTML, but we also have, for example, what Citoid would have said for that web page. We also have the Citoid response for that web page. We also have HTTP headers from the response. We also have the URL for that web page. And these things are not part of the HTML. So when we refer to a target web page, not only are we referring to the HTML of the web page, but also to what Citoid would have said for that, the HTTP headers, and the URL. This is good because that means that we can get metadata not only from the web page itself, but also from other parts related to this web page, which again is the cited response, the HTTP headers, and the URL. So right now we currently support only 3 selection types. One of them is the expat selection. Again, if you go to the web guidelines, you can find more detail about it. The expat selection selects a specific node in the HTML using expat expressions. The citoid selection selects a specific field from the citoid response for that web page, and the fixed selection uses a fixed value no matter what the web page is or how the web page looks like. We're gonna see this in an example later on. And we support more transformation steps. They're all in the guidelines, but for example, you can have split transformations that, for example, take a string and split the string in two parts using at the limiter, like a comma. You have also, we also have the date transformation step, which tries to transform natural language date, like for example, March 14th or 15th, 2022, into a format the way how we want it. And that works with different locales, like it supports English, for example, but it also supports Spanish and many more languages. But you can find a full list of transformation steps in the guidelines. And finally, so you have a target web page. The relevant elements are selected using the selection steps defined. The output of these selections is passed to the transformations, which are applied sequentially. And at the end, we get an output, which is the same output we got in the previous slide right here. We have a web page, we have a procedure, we have an output as the result. Let me go to the next slide. And
so
the final,
can I ask a question there? So transformations and procedure are kind of the same thing, so to speak, right? So the procedure applies transformations. That's the idea.
Yeah, but the selection is part of the procedure as well.
Okay. Okay.
It's like the procedure is how you get metadata from the web page, and that includes what you select and which transformations you apply to those selections.
So can you go back to the slide?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. So yeah, so it says the translation. Okay, so the translation procedure has these two main steps. It was my bad. I should have read the title.
That's right. And the final thing that you have to know about how to configure translation in Web2Cit is that we said that you had like separate domains. Within each domain, you have one or more templates, because you might have, as you said, Evelyn, before, you might have different kinds of web pages living inside the same domain, so you might want to configure more than one template. But in some cases, you might want to further subdivide translation within a domain. So you may also define some URL patterns. So for example, we define here a pattern which is /blog/whatever. That's that wildcard, that asterisk there. So it tells us that whatever web page that matches this URL path pattern, it's going to be translated only with the templates that also match that pattern. Okay, and for every domains, we anyway have a fallback pattern. So if you do not want to define patterns, or if you only want to define just a few patterns, don't worry. If you have a target web page that does not match any of the patterns defined, we will always have the fallback pattern. Yeah, so most of the cases, patterns are not needed, but if you need them, they're up there for you. Yeah, you were gonna say something?
No, I mean, maybe, are you gonna show this with more concrete examples afterwards? Because it's a little bit, it's a little bit abstract.
Okay. Okay, for the pattern specifically, I wasn't planning to show an example because it's a very specific use case.
We can move on then, no worries.
Okay.
So let's just move on, and then if we see that this is like a part that needs more explanation, we can add something on the Web2Cit page directly.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on. Going back to the initial slide, we have our Web2Cit system complete right here in this figure. So let's say we come with a target web page. Again, the target web page, as we said, is not just the HTML. It also has these other related parts to it. So the first thing Web2Cit does when it gets a target web page, is it checks the target's domain. So let's say in this example, we are trying to translate, sorry, I don't have it written here. Let's say we're trying to translate example.com/article2, for example, /blog/article2. So first thing Web2Cit does is it checks what domain it should use. So if it is example.com, it's not going to use sub.example.com. It's going to use the configuration saved for example.com because that's the target's domain. Now, I said the URL was example.com/blog/article2. Does this URL match any of the patterns? Yes, in this case, it matches the pattern above, so it's going to ignore the other patterns. And once we know what domain and what pattern the target belongs to, then Web2Cit is going to try one template one by one in order. It's going to try the first template, then it's going to try the second one. And it's going to see if any of these templates are applicable. Remember from before, a template is applicable for a specific target web page if for all of the template fields, it outputs a valid output. So as soon as it finds one template that is applicable for the target web page, it's going to output a citation. The first template that is applicable, that output is going to be used to render a citation. In case there is no template applicable, then a fallback template is going to be used. Specifically right now, the fallback template is a template that for all fields, it just returns the citoid response for that field. So using Web2Cit without any configuration means that the fallback template is going to be used. So it means that it's going to return what citoid would have returned, only that for a specific subset of fields. You're not going to get the full range of fields that citoid would have returned, just the fields that Web2Cit is currently supporting. This is going to be might be revised in the future, but if any of you might be interested in how we are thinking that this might be revised, you can check that Fabricator task. But for now, and probably from the initial release, this is how it's going to work. If no template is applicable, a fallback template is going to be used, and the fallback template is for all fields, just return the cited output.
And well, but we are also assuming here that if citoid is returning good data, then you wouldn't go to Web2Cit, right? So
absolutely,
like, it's kind of a reasonable assumption to say,
yes,
you know, like you should not use this for websites that are currently working with citoid properly.
Yes, it's true, but as you might see in the Fabricator task, Web2Cit might be used to fix some errors in citoid. Maybe let's imagine that just the title is wrong. If I use Web2Cit to fix the title, I might be losing other fields that citoid was returning. Again, these fields are not essential because right now in Web2Cit we support the item type, the title, the authors, the date of creation, the language, and the place of publication and the publisher. That's like what you would need for most citations. But for example, if you're talking about a journal article, we currently don't support the issue or the page number. And that's something that's cited.
Also, yeah, but that's also reasonable because most like journal, well,
I mean,
for the most part, let's say, because we've seen everything that's under the sun, but for the most part, they are already being supported. Yeah.
It's true. But anyway, if you're interested in seeing how because we have an idea for how to make this better without changing Web2Cit too much. If you want to see what we're thinking about it, just go to the Fabricator task and write your comments there.
Yeah, and before we continue, so you mentioned